Sarah stood at the edge of her garden, her fingers lightly brushing the soft petals of a sunflower that towered over her. The sun's rays caught the golden yellow of the blooms, making them shimmer as if they had been kissed by sunlight itself. To anyone passing by, it was a peaceful sight, a tranquil maze of sunflowers that seemed to stretch into infinity. What most didn't know, however, was that this garden was her masterpiece. It wasn't just a collection of flowers. It was a labor of love, a carefully crafted sanctuary, designed over the years with the precision of a botanical expert. Each sunflower was placed with purpose, each row arranged to create the perfect visual illusion of a labyrinth, a space where the colors, textures, and scents combined to form an experience. Sarah wasn't just a gardener. She was a renowned botanist, known for her groundbreaking research in plant hybridization. Her work had led to innovations that improved crops in some of the world's most arid regions. But here, in the confines of her backyard, none of that mattered. It was her personal refuge, a place where her mind could wander, and her passion for plants could thrive without the constraints of scientific papers and academic pressure. The sunflowers were more than just ornamental. They were part of an experimental hybridization project she'd been quietly working on. The particular strain she cultivated was resistant to drought, had a longer blooming period, and produced seeds with a higher nutritional content. An accidental breakthrough, perhaps, but one that could change the future of food production. Only a handful of people knew of her work, and those who did understood the delicate nature of her research. As Sarah gazed at her maze, she noticed something that sent a shiver down her spine. A letter. It was tucked beneath the edge of one of the sunflowers, almost as if someone had deliberately placed it there. Her heart skipped a beat. No one ever came into her garden unless they were invited. Slowly, she crouched down, her fingers trembling slightly as she unfolded the crisp paper. The letter was short, written in a cold, impersonal font that made her skin crawl. Dear Ms. Thompson, we have received complaints about your landscaping. Your sunflower maze is in direct violation of HOA guidelines. You are hereby instructed to remove it within 10 days, or you will face fines and further legal action. Failure to comply will result in additional measures. Sincerely, the Homeowners Association. Her mind raced. She knew the HOA had a reputation for being excessively strict about property upkeep, but she had never expected them to target her garden. She stared at the words on the paper, but they blurred in front of her eyes. The maze wasn't just a garden. It was her sanctuary. The thought of losing it, of seeing it torn down, felt like losing a part of herself. A flash of anger flared in her chest. She couldn't believe this was happening. But deep down, a nagging voice whispered that this wasn't just about the maze. The HOA had been eyeing her garden for months, and now they had found a reason to tear it apart. But who would have complained? She hadn't heard a single negative word from the neighbors. In fact, most people loved the maze, children played in it, and adults admired its beauty. No, this was personal. Someone in the HOA had it out for her, and she was about to find out who. Her eyes narrowed, and a chill ran down her spine. She wasn't going to let them destroy her work, not without a fight. The next morning, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling of unease that lingered from the letter. Every corner of her garden seemed to mock her sense of peace, the sunflowers now looking too bright, too perfect, like they were aware of the storm that was coming. Her fingers tightened around the coffee mug she held, and she stared out at the maze, already dreading what might come next. But as Sarah glanced out the window, a flash of movement caught her eye. It was a figure at the edge of her property, a tall woman, impeccably dressed, her shoes clicking against the pavement with a purpose. Karen, the HOA president. Sarah had seen Karen around the neighborhood before, always meticulously groomed, her expression a blend of authority and judgment. Karen had a reputation. It was whispered that she had nothing better to do than to scrutinize every inch of the neighborhood, making sure everyone's lawns were perfect, fences were at the right height, and apparently, sunflower mazes stayed within the boundaries of HOA guidelines. A knot tightened in Sarah's stomach as Karen approached her gate. She didn't look like she was here to offer a friendly chat. No, Karen's eyes were cold, calculating, as if she had already made up her mind. When Sarah opened the door, Karen didn't bother with pleasantries. She was holding a clipboard, her posture stiff and official. "Good morning, Miss Thompson," Karen began, her voice clipped. "I see you've received our letter." Sarah took a deep breath, trying to keep her composure. "Yes, I did. I don't understand what the problem is. The maze is harmless. It's not affecting anyone." Karen didn't flinch. Her gaze was piercing, focused. "That's where you're wrong. It's not harmless. It's an eyesore, a violation of our community standards." She made a show of glancing over her shoulder, as though the sunflowers were guilty of some unspoken crime. "And it's not just an aesthetic issue. It's about control, about maintaining order. The HOA has rules for a reason." "Order?" Sarah's voice came out sharper than she intended. "This is my property, Karen. The maze is not harming anyone. In fact, it's become part of the neighborhood's charm. People love it." "People," Karen repeated, her lips curling into a thin smile. "Let's be honest here. There's always someone who thinks they can bend the rules, push the limits. But in this neighborhood, we follow the guidelines, and I'm afraid your sunflower maze is in violation of them. You have 10 days to remove it." The audacity of Karen's words struck Sarah hard. 10 days. She had poured years of her life into that garden, each sunflower chosen with purpose, each petal a symbol of her passion for botany. It wasn't just a maze. It was a piece of her soul. The thought of tearing it down seemed impossible. "I'm not going to tear it down," Sarah said, her voice steady but tinged with defiance. "I won't comply with this." Karen's eyes flashed, a brief moment of annoyance slipping through her carefully composed exterior. "Then we'll have no choice but to take further action. You'll face fines, legal measures, whatever it takes to make you comply." Sarah felt the weight of the threats settle over her. This wasn't just a disagreement over landscaping. It was a power struggle. Karen had decided that her authority mattered more than Sarah's work, her passion, her life's pursuit. But just as the tension began to build, Karen turned to leave. Sarah could feel the air grow colder, the unspoken warning hanging in the air. "We'll see about that," Karen said without looking back, her voice just low enough for Sarah to catch the underlying menace. As Sarah watched Karen walk away, she felt the first real sting of fear. This wasn't going to end with a simple dispute. No, this was war. War over something much deeper than sunflowers. The next few days passed in a blur. As Sarah tended to her garden, every sound outside her window seemed amplified. Every footstep, every whisper. She began to notice subtle changes in her neighborhood. A car slowing down by her fence, people watching her from across the street, as if waiting for her to make a move. And then, late one night, there was a knock at her door. Startled, Sarah opened it to find a plain, unmarked package on her doorstep. It wasn't wrapped in anything fancy, but something about it felt ominous, a weight in the air that made her skin crawl. Inside, she found a single wilted sunflower, its petals darkened and dried, its stem snapped in half. There was no note, no explanation. But as Sarah stared at the sad flower, one chilling sentence echoed in her mind: "Remove the maze, or face consequences." The feeling of dread gnawed at her. The game had just gotten much darker. The wilted sunflower haunted Sarah's thoughts throughout the following day. It wasn't just a warning, it was a threat. But who would go so far as to send something like that? Her fingers still tingled from touching the dried petals, the unnerving weight of the unknown pressing down on her chest. It was as though the letter and the package had merged into a single ominous shadow, lurking just beyond the edge of her consciousness. The morning passed quietly, the usual suburban hum of lawnmowers and distant conversations in the park filling the air. But Sarah couldn't relax. Her thoughts churned endlessly. What was Karen capable of? What lengths would the HOA go to in order to make her comply? They had already threatened legal action. Would they really go further? As Sarah stood in her kitchen, preparing a simple breakfast, she glanced out the window. The garden looked almost normal. The sunflowers, their heads tilted slightly towards the sun, gave no indication that their future was hanging by a thread. They were as beautiful as ever, but Sarah couldn't stop the unease from crawling under her skin. What was Karen planning next? A soft knock on the door startled her, breaking the silence like a crack of thunder in the calm. Sarah froze, her heart racing. She wasn't expecting anyone, and the timing felt too perfect, too staged. With a reluctant breath, she walked to the door, her pulse quickening. When she opened it, she was met by an unexpected sight. It wasn't Karen standing there, clipboard in hand, ready to continue her campaign of intimidation. Instead, it was Marissa, her neighbor from 2 houses down. Marissa was holding a small basket, but her eyes were filled with a strange urgency, her hands trembling as she extended the basket towards Sarah. "Sarah," Marissa said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper, "I need to warn you. You don't know what you're dealing with." Confusion rippled through Sarah. Marissa wasn't someone who typically involved herself in neighborhood drama, especially not HOA affairs. She took a step forward, taking the basket from her neighbor's hands. Inside was a handful of fresh sunflowers, unmistakably the same variety Sarah had planted in her maze. But these were different. They looked wrong. Some petals were curling inward, others had strange, jagged edges. They looked sickly, as if they had been poisoned. "What is this?" Sarah asked, her voice tight. "I found them this morning in my yard. Someone must have put them there." Marissa looked over her shoulder, as if checking to make sure no one was listening. "I know it's strange, but the same thing happened to my friend Susan last year. The HOA sent her these warning flowers. She didn't take them seriously. 2 weeks later, her house was hit with massive fines, and the HOA forced her to move. She had to sell everything." Sarah's breath caught in her throat. The connection hit her like a punch to the gut. This wasn't just about her garden. It was a game of power, and the stakes were rising. The HOA wasn't playing by the rules anymore. They were using fear, manipulation, and intimidation to force their will upon her. And it was working. "I'm telling you, they won't stop," Marissa said, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and concern. "If you don't back down, they'll make you disappear." The words hung in the air like a sentence she couldn't avoid. Disappear. It wasn't just the garden anymore. It was her life, her reputation, everything she'd built. If the HOA could tear down something as seemingly innocent as a sunflower maze, what else were they capable of? Marissa stepped closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. "You need to be careful. You have no idea what Karen and the HOA are capable of." The silence between them was thick with tension. The warning hung over Sarah's head like a storm cloud, dark and menacing. The maze had become something far more than a simple garden. It was a battleground, and Sarah had no idea just how deep the war went. As Marissa turned to leave, her words echoed in Sarah's mind, lingering long after her footsteps had faded into the distance. "You don't know what you're dealing with." And Sarah realized, in that moment, she was far from ready for the storm that was about to break. The days following Marissa's warning were a blur of anticipation and dread. Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming, something catastrophic. She tended to her sunflowers with robotic precision, each movement more automatic than the last, as if she were trying to ward off an inevitable fate. But the tension in the air was palpable, and no amount of watering or pruning could soothe the gnawing fear in her stomach. Then it came. It was just after dawn when Sarah woke to the sound of engines rumbling. Her heart leaped into her throat as she threw open the window, her breath catching in her chest. The sight that met her eyes nearly made her collapse. A line of bulldozers and construction vehicles was parked just outside her gate, their engines humming ominously in the quiet morning. There were men in work uniforms, hard hats on their heads, standing around with clipboards and tools. The unmistakable figure of Karen was at the front, arms crossed, standing like a general ready to issue orders. Before Sarah could even move, Karen's voice rang out, sharp and commanding. Begin the demolition. Her knees weakened, but she forced herself to step outside. The sunflowers, the beautiful maze she had nurtured and built with her own hands, were now in the crosshairs of a merciless machine. As Sarah marched toward the gate, fury surged in her chest. "What are you doing?" she shouted, her voice cracking with disbelief. "You can't just tear this down." Karen didn't even glance at her. Instead, she focused on the workers, nodding sharply. "Do it. Now." The bulldozers roared to life, their engines growling like angry beasts. Sarah's pulse pounded in her ears as she sprinted toward the maze, her heart hammering in her chest. The machines rumbled forward, their massive wheels crushing the delicate stems of the sunflowers beneath them. She could hear the sickening sound of petals being shredded, the earth itself being torn up. Every step felt like a wound to her very soul. "Stop!" she screamed, but her voice was swallowed by the noise. She tried to run to the nearest bulldozer, her arms flailing as she attempted to stop the driver, but he didn't even notice her. The workers were focused on their task, oblivious to the destruction they were causing. Sarah's hands trembled as she reached the gate. It wasn't just the maze they were destroying. It was her work, her passion, her research. The hybrid sunflowers were a breakthrough, a scientific miracle. And now they were being reduced to mulch under the relentless weight of machinery. As Sarah's feet collided with the dirt path leading to the center of the maze, the reality of the situation hit her full force. She could feel the ground beneath her shaking as the bulldozer plowed through row after row of towering sunflowers, their faces turning to the earth as though mourning their fate. The smell of crushed petals and soil filled the air. The workers didn't stop. No one did. Sarah's breath caught in her throat as she realized how hopeless this was. The maze, her sanctuary, was being destroyed before her very eyes, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. Karen walked calmly toward her, a smug expression on her face as she finally acknowledged Sarah's presence. "I warned you," she said, her voice devoid of any empathy. "I gave you a chance to comply, but you didn't listen. Now you'll suffer the consequences." Tears stung at the corners of Sarah's eyes, but she swallowed them down, pushing back the surge of helplessness that threatened to overwhelm her. She wasn't just going to stand by and watch this happen. Not anymore. "No," Sarah whispered, her voice low but firm. "You've made a mistake, Karen. You don't understand what you're destroying." Karen raised an eyebrow, her smirk widening. "I understand perfectly. This is about control, Sarah. The HOA decides what stays and what goes. You never stood a chance." Sarah's pulse surged as the word sank in. This wasn't just about a garden. It was about power. The HOA, Karen, they were using her garden as a pawn in their game, flexing their muscle. They were trying to crush her, to show the entire neighborhood that their rules mattered more than anything else. But Sarah wasn't done. She had been pushed too far, and she was starting to realize that this battle wasn't about flowers. It was about something bigger. She turned on her heel, a new sense of resolve hardening inside her chest. This isn't over, she thought. She would fight back. She had to. As Sarah stormed toward her house, she knew one thing for certain. Karen had no idea who she was really up against. The storm was only just beginning. The sun was low in the sky by the time Sarah made it back to her front door, the air thick with the stench of crushed sunflowers and overturned soil. She slammed the door shut behind her, her hands trembling as they gripped the handle. Her heart was racing, blood pulsing in her ears, a mixture of anger, fear, and disbelief swirling in her chest. But as the door clicked into place, Sarah didn't feel relief. She felt something else, something deeper, darker. This wasn't just about the garden anymore. The bulldozers, the destruction, it was all a message. Karen's smile had been a warning, and the implications of that smile were beginning to sink in. "You never stood a chance." The words replayed in her mind like a mantra, echoing against the walls of her house. Sarah had always been prepared for the hard work of botany, the science, the research, but never this. The battle for her garden had escalated beyond what she could have ever imagined. And now, as she paced through the living room, the reality hit her like a tidal wave. This wasn't about control over her garden. It was about control over her life. Her phone buzzed on the counter, pulling her from her spiraling thoughts. Sarah picked it up without thinking. The screen flashed a name she hadn't expected to see. Marissa. "Sarah, you have to listen to me. It's worse than I thought. You need to leave." Marissa's voice crackled through the phone, panic cutting through the calm of the morning. Sarah's pulse quickened. "What do you mean, leave? What's going on?" "You don't understand," Marissa whispered, her voice trembling. "Karen doesn't just run the HOA. She's part of something bigger. The whole neighborhood. It's a front. They've been running things for years. You're not just fighting against an HOA anymore, Sarah. You're fighting against a system that's been built to control everything." Sarah's mind reeled. The system. "Marissa, what are you talking about? What system?" "There's an organization, one that controls the HOA. They use the HOA to manipulate people, to get them to fall in line, to take over properties that are worth something. Sarah, you've been targeted. Your research, your garden, it's valuable. They'll do anything to get their hands on it." Sarah's breath caught in her throat. The sunflowers, her hybrid sunflowers, had always been a scientific curiosity, but could they really be worth that much? The implications were terrifying, and her mind refused to accept the gravity of what Marissa was suggesting. "You're saying they want my research, my sunflowers?" "Yes, they've been watching you. And Karen's just their puppet. If you don't leave, they'll destroy you. They'll ruin your reputation, take your work, and silence you." A cold shiver ran down Sarah's spine. For the first time since the nightmare began, she realized how deeply entangled she was in something far larger than she could have ever imagined. "Marissa, how do you know this?" Marissa hesitated, her voice strained. "I've seen it before. My friend Susan, she didn't just lose her house. They made her disappear, erased her from the neighborhood. I think she's gone. No one talks about her anymore. They get rid of people who threaten them. People like you." The silence that followed felt like a lead weight on Sarah's chest. Disappear. The word hung in the air like an icy gust of wind. This wasn't just about her garden. It was about her entire future, her work, her very identity as a botanist. She was caught in a web of manipulation and power, and there was no way out. Sarah didn't know who these people were or what lengths they would go to, but she knew one thing for certain: they had underestimated her. She had never been one to back down, to let fear dictate her actions. And now, faced with a threat that went beyond her garden, she made a vow to herself. She would fight back, but not with her hands. Not with destruction. No, she had something far more powerful: her mind. As the phone call ended, Sarah's eyes narrowed, the fire of determination flickering in her gaze. She wasn't going to run. She wasn't going to let them win. She would find a way to turn the tables. And Karen, the HOA, and whatever shadowy group was behind it all. They had no idea what kind of storm they were about to unleash. Sarah's hands gripped the edge of the counter as her mind raced. Marissa's words hung in the air, a cold shiver creeping down her spine. The idea that her garden, her passion, was somehow tied to something much darker than the petty HOA squabbles she'd been fighting made her feel small, vulnerable. She stared at her phone, the remnants of the call buzzing in her ears. She couldn't let herself become another nameless casualty in this unseen war. She had to act, and she had to do it fast. As much as the thought of leaving the neighborhood crossed her mind, the truth was undeniable. Sarah wasn't going anywhere. She would fight. She had to. The sun had set, leaving the sky a deep violet streaked with orange as Sarah paced through her house. Her fingers drummed nervously against the doorframe, her thoughts swirling in a storm of possibilities. She needed information. She needed to understand who or what she was dealing with. Her computer screen blinked to life, casting a cold light in the dark room as she sat down and opened her laptop. A search for Karen HOA president didn't yield much at first, just a handful of standard community involvement profiles. But Sarah knew better. She wasn't looking for a casual name drop. She needed deeper connections, something hidden behind the facade of suburban propriety. She opened a new tab and began searching for something more specific: HOA corruption, property manipulation, underground networks in suburban developments. Her fingers flew over the keyboard as her heart raced, the tension in her chest building with each click. Her eyes widened when she found an obscure forum buried on a local neighborhood website. The title was innocuous: Real Estate Development News, Neighborhood Trends and Opportunities. But the comments within it, they were anything but. One post stood out, written by someone whose name she didn't recognize. It was recent, and the words had the unmistakable scent of desperation. They're watching us. The HOA is just the front. The real players, the ones pulling the strings, they're part of a network that's been buying up properties in this neighborhood. They manipulate homeowners, offering incentives, pushing people to sell under false pretenses. It's like they know every weakness, every corner where people feel vulnerable. They want it all: your land, your research, your assets. And they never leave a trace. No one will ever know who's behind it. Her breath caught in her throat. It was exactly what Marissa had warned her about. This wasn't just about controlling gardens. This was about power, money, and manipulating people to get what they wanted. This group, whoever they were, didn't care about rules. They created them. Another comment below that one read, "I've been in too deep for too long. They got to me through the HOA, and now I can't get out. My house is on the market, and I'm being forced to sell. I don't know who's making the calls, but someone's behind all of this." That was all Sarah needed to see. The puzzle pieces were starting to fall into place, but the picture was darker than she could have imagined. Her hand hovered over the mouse, about to close the forum, when something caught her eye. One final post, just a few comments down, left an email address: info@neighborhoodtrends.com. It was brief, cryptic, but the name sent a jolt through her spine. Neighborhood Trends. It was the same phrase that had been floating in the comments. There was no turning back now. Sarah opened her email and composed a message, her fingers shaking as she typed. "I need answers. Who are you? What is this network? I want to know who's behind the HOA." She stared at the screen, her heart pounding. Before she could reconsider, she hit send. The consequences of what she had just done weren't lost on her. Whoever was on the other side of that email would either ignore her or, worse, respond in ways she wasn't prepared for. But there was no going back. If she was going to survive this, she needed to dig deeper, way deeper, into this underground world of manipulation. A few seconds later, an email pinged back. The subject line made her freeze. "We know who you are." The hairs on the back of her neck stood on end as she clicked open the email. Her hands were ice cold as the words appeared on the screen. "You're playing a dangerous game, Sarah, but you've been noticed. If you want to stay alive in this game, stop digging. You'll be better off not knowing. But if you want to keep pushing, well, let's just say we'll be watching." The email ended with a signature: The Network. The blood drained from Sarah's face. The threat was real. Whoever they were, they had their eyes on her. But that only fueled her resolve. If they were watching her now, she'd give them something to watch. It was time to make her move. Sarah's fingers hovered over her keyboard, the email from the network still fresh in her mind. The words felt like a slap to her face, the weight of their warning heavy on her chest. The truth of it sent a chill down her spine, but she refused to let it paralyze her. She had no intention of backing down. This was no longer just a fight for her garden. It was a battle for everything she had worked for, everything she had built. She had to find a way to turn the tables. Her mind raced with possibilities as she stared at the email. searching for any hint of weakness or an opening. The cold finality of the words, the dark undertones, didn't scare her. No, they only made her more determined. She wasn't going to let some shadowy group intimidate her into silence. Just as she leaned back in her chair, trying to process her next move, a knock at the door startled her. A sharp, rapid knock, unmistakable, like a warning. Her heart skipped a beat. She didn't know if it was the thought of the network watching her or something else that caused her immediate panic. But she didn't hesitate. She grabbed the nearest heavy object, a small vase, and approached the door with caution. She peered through the peephole, and her breath caught in her throat. It was Marissa. Her neighbor's face was tight with worry, her eyes darting nervously around the street. Sarah hesitated for a moment, but then opened the door. Marissa stepped inside quickly, looking over her shoulder to ensure no one was watching. "Sarah," she said in a hushed voice, her tone urgent. "We don't have much time." Sarah's heart pounded. What's going on? What happened? Marissa closed the door behind her and lowered her voice even further. "You were right. The HOA is just a small part of this whole operation. The network, they've been using the HOA to target properties like yours. But they're more than just property developers. They're ruthless. They'll do anything to get what they want, and they'll destroy anyone in their way." Sarah's breath caught in her throat. She'd been expecting this, but hearing it from Marissa made it all the more real. "What do you mean, ruthless?" "They'll intimidate, blackmail, destroy, whatever it takes," Marissa continued, glancing nervously toward the window. "And they have connections everywhere, even the police, even people you wouldn't suspect." Sarah's mind raced. It sounded like a nightmare, but Marissa's frantic demeanor told her that this was no exaggeration. "Then how do we stop them?" Marissa hesitated before speaking again, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've been doing some digging. I think I've found someone who can help. Someone who knows how to go after the network without them knowing who's behind it." Sarah's eyes widened. "Who?" "A former HOA member. He's been out of the loop for a while, but he knows things. He can help us take them down, but we have to move fast." Sarah didn't even need to think. She nodded, determination flooding her veins. "What's the plan?" "We meet him tomorrow, but you need to be ready for anything. They're not just going to let you walk away from this. You're already in their sights. Tomorrow." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. "How do you know he's trustworthy?" Marissa looked Sarah square in the eyes. "I don't, but he's our best shot. And right now, it's the only shot we've got." The weight of the decision hit Sarah like a punch to the gut. She could sense the danger, feel it creeping closer with every word Marissa spoke, but she knew she couldn't back down. The fear that had paralyzed her earlier was being replaced by a searing determination. As Marissa turned to leave, she placed a hand on Sarah's shoulder. "Just be careful. They'll be watching you. You've already made enemies in high places." Sarah nodded, her jaw clenched. "I'm not scared of them." Marissa's eyes softened with concern, but she didn't say another word. She stepped out of the door, disappearing into the quiet night. Sarah stood there for a moment, her heart pounding in her chest. She wasn't sure what the future held, but one thing was clear. She was no longer playing by the rules. She was going to fight back. And no matter what the network threw at her, she was ready. Tomorrow, everything would change. She would find the answers she was looking for, and she would bring the fight to them. The air was thick with tension as Sarah paced the room, her mind racing. The clock on the wall ticked louder than usual, each passing second making her feel like she was on the edge of something. Something big. Marissa's warning echoed in her mind. "They'll be watching you." The thought of meeting with the former HOA member both excited and terrified her. Could she really trust this stranger who claimed to know how to take down the network? What if it was another trap? But she had no choice. She had come too far to turn back now. The meeting was set for an old coffee shop on the outskirts of town, far enough from her neighborhood to avoid suspicion, but close enough to be convenient. Sarah couldn't help but feel the weight of the secrecy pressing down on her. She had no idea what she was walking into. She arrived early, her nerves making her hands shake as she pulled into the parking lot. The small cafe was tucked between two rundown buildings, its windows fogged with the breath of the cold morning air. She took a deep breath and pushed open the door, the warmth inside a sharp contrast to the chill outside. The smell of brewed coffee filled the air, grounding her. She scanned the room. There were a few regulars scattered around, sipping their drinks in silence, their faces lost in their own worlds. But she was looking for someone specific. Her eyes fell on a man sitting at the back corner, hidden in the shadows. He was unassuming, dressed in a simple jacket and jeans, but there was something about him. Something cold, calculating in the way he observed the room. His eyes locked with hers the moment she stepped inside, and Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. She walked over to him slowly, trying to steady her breath. "Are you the one who called?" she asked, her voice betraying the nervous energy that had been building in her chest. The man smiled faintly, his lips barely curling. "You're Sarah, I take it, the one who's stirring the pot with the network." His voice was low, almost too smooth. "I've been expecting you." Sarah sat down across from him, her eyes narrowing. "You know what they're capable of." "Capable of? They are the system," he replied, his tone darkening. "The HOA, the properties, the development. It's all part of a much larger plan. They've infiltrated every layer of this town, built it from the ground up. You think they just want your garden? No, they want control over everything, and you're the last piece of their puzzle." Sarah's chest tightened. "So what do we do about it?" The man's smile faded, and for the first time, his eyes hardened with seriousness. "We expose them, every last one of them. But it won't be easy. They're well connected, and they'll fight back hard. But you're not the first to try, and you won't be the last. The question is, Sarah, are you prepared for what you'll have to sacrifice?" Her heart raced. "Sacrifice? I don't care what I have to do," she said, her voice steady but filled with urgency. "I've already lost everything. They've torn down my sunflowers, destroyed my work, and I'm not going to let them get away with it." The man nodded slowly, as though he was weighing her words. "Then we start today. But we need leverage, something they can't ignore. You've got something they want, something they can't just take with bulldozers. Your research." Sarah froze. He was right. Her hybrid sunflowers, the genetic modifications, the research, that was the key. It was her leverage, and she hadn't even realized it. She had more power than she thought. And now she had to use it. "How do we use it?" she asked, her mind racing with possibilities. The man leaned forward, his eyes gleaming with a dangerous intensity. "We make them think they're in control. We let them come to us. And when they do, we hit them where it hurts. We expose their entire operation." Sarah's pulse quickened as the realization set in. This was it, the final play. She wasn't just a victim anymore. She was the one calling the shots. But the stakes were higher than ever before. The network was watching, and they would stop at nothing to protect their secrets. "I'm in," Sarah said, her voice steady now, the fear replaced by something sharper. "What's the first step?" The man slid a small flash drive across the table toward her. "Everything you need is on here. The network's skeleton's in the closet. Use it wisely." As Sarah took the flash drive into her hand, a wave of anticipation washed over her. This was it, the final game. She had all the pieces she needed. The only question left was whether or not she could outsmart them before they could destroy her. And for the first time in what felt like forever, Sarah felt like she was in control.